All right. Bom, pessoal, sejam bem-vindos, bom dia. No meio da Copa do Mundo, sejam bem-vindos a mais uma das nossas falas do Seminário Internacional de Comunicação, Esporte e Mídia. Nós temos o nosso primeiro convidado internacional, na verdade, segundo, né? Porque, tecnicamente, o Renan, mesmo sendo brasileiro, é professor lá em Leeds, na Inglaterra, mas o Daniel é nosso convidado internacional. Teremos o Mark Doig na próxima quinta-feira também às 10 horas. E hoje o Daniel vai falar sobre o jornalismo esportivo e as suas mudanças em relação ao digital, né? Então, é um prazer imenso ter o Daniel, já é meu amigo, conhecido, já há algum tempo a gente já troca alguns e-mails, então é ótimo ter a presença dele. Aqueles avisos de sempre, né, gente? Antes de passar a palavra para o meu co-host, o professor Rolando Ferreira, júnior, temos a lista de chamada, também lista de presença, desculpa, chamada, não, lista de presença, eu vou passar para vocês ali. Assinem, né, registrem que vocês estão aqui, como eu falei, para o certificado de 16 horas como atividade complementar, da extensão, da Tuiuti, vocês têm que estar presente em 3 dos 4 eventos, né? Esse é o terceiro, o quarto é o da semana que vem com o professor Mark Doig, da Universidade de Brighton. E agora eu passo a palavra ao meu amigo Rolando, né, co-host Rolando, para fazer a apresentação do Daniel, e depois o Daniel vai fazer a sua apresentação também. Então, sejam muito bem-vindos, espero que tenhamos um ótimo debate.
Bom dia a todos, né? Então, é um prazer muito grande estar aqui novamente nessa posição de co-host, né? É uma satisfação muito grande, um prazer muito grande, né? E nada mais atual, né? Durante a Copa do Mundo, a gente está falando de jornalismo esportivo e essas coisas. Então, casou muito bem, né? Não sei se era a intenção do Márcio, mas, né? Foi ótimo, né? Então, hoje a gente tem o nosso convidado, né? Que vai falar sobre jornalismo esportivo e relações públicas. Então, Daniel Nölleke, não sei se eu falei certo. Ele é professor júnior na Universidade Alemã de Esporte em Colónia. Anteriormente, trabalhou como investigador de estudos jornalísticos no seu pós-doc na Universidade de Viena. Daniel terminou seus estudos de mestrado e doutoramento no Departamento de Comunicação da Universidade de Münster, na Alemanha. Não sei se... I don't know if that's say like that. My pronunciation is kind of... long time I don't speak English, and those German words are strange to me. So, Daniel, welcome. And the time is yours. The screen is yours. You can start your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'll start my presentation, and I think I understood some of the words you said, even in Portuguese, so I think you got everything correctly. So thanks for the invitation. And just a second. Let me share the screen. And so do you see the presentation?
Yes.
And you see not the note mode, but the mode with only the slides. Correct?
Yeah, I believe.
So you see the slides and you don't see my notes.
I don't see your notes. Yeah.
Okay, because I need them. Okay. I need them. Wait. Okay, so let's see if this works. Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so, okay, perfect. So thank you so much for the invitation, Matthew and Rolando. It's my pleasure and a huge privilege to share with you some thoughts and findings on the current state of sports journalism. While I hope that this might be interesting to you, I'm absolutely sure that I will benefit greatly from our discussion. I'm extremely eager to learn about your perspectives. And before I start, I should definitely leave a disclaimer here. Of course, everything that I say is mainly informed by a European or a US perspective on sports communication. And I'm totally aware that sports cultures and sports media cultures differ. So I hope you can relate to the aspects I mentioned, but maybe more importantly, they can encourage you to think about the state of sports media in Brazil. And maybe this would be the best thing, I think, even initiate collaborations between Europe, or us and me, and South American researchers. So, however, in a digital world, The digital world is a world in which national or continental boundaries have become less important. As is true for the entire hybrid media system, the digital sports media system is highly globalized. So I'm quite confident that the starting points when discussing the current role of sports journalism, what I intend to do in the next 80 minutes or so, are somewhat similar to what you have experienced. My starting point is that the game of sports communication has shifted enormously. For a long time, there was only one player on the pitch who delivered sports-related content to the audience, and that was legacy sports journalism. As in wider journalism, sports journalism used to have a quasi-monopoly for publicly distributing information. And it is no secret that the situation has changed fundamentally in the digital age. The pitch has become more crowded, and it is no longer the journalists who control the game. In fact, it is not even self-evident that they are still part of the sport media's starting lineup, or assumed they are still part of the starting lineup if they are not considered the first logical substitutes by many audience members. Maybe they prefer some of the new entrants to the fields of sports media, of which I only list some of them on the slides, besides digital-only formats such as The Athletic and The Zone in Germany, who have arguably also disrupted how present legacy sports journalism looks like. Other players have entered the pitch who used not to be confused as journalists, namely fan bloggers, who often possess superior expertise when it comes to a very niche topic, such as a specific tennis player, a specific football team, or a specific niche sport, for example, that is not covered by traditional media. And then we have, which appears to be the most threatening for journalism, sports itself, who has become a major media player through providing own content on websites or social media accounts. And this is highly appreciated, particularly by young audiences who appear to think more in terms of channels instead of outlets when consuming sport-related information. In a nutshell, and I will elaborate on this later, recent developments in the digital sphere have disrupted sports journalism, as Simon McAnnis argues in his recent book. Journalism, as Marie Hardin and Andrew Bullings put it, can be considered a fracturing profession on shifting terrain. And I will go with you through this shifting terrain in the next couple of minutes. I want to enter and explore this terrain in terms of theoretical and empirical approaches. However, I won't focus on sports journalism itself and will not address how it navigates through this terrain. Rather, I pay attention to those who obviously no longer see a necessity for sports journalism in the starting lineup, on young audiences, on sports organizations, and on the wider journalistic field, which has always tended to dismiss the sports department as inferior, as the toy department, if you will. So let's start with some conceptual ideas and some arguments from previous literature. Without a doubt, we are currently witnessing a shift in long-established power structures in the sports media complex. Both parties, sports and the media, used to maintain a symbiotic relationship. Sports organizations relied on the media coverage to gain visibility and attract sponsors. Journalists, in turn, benefited from access to teams and events, which allowed them to provide valuable content that reinforced their position as an economic muscle in newsrooms. In digital media landscapes, however, sports organizations have become increasingly independent of sports journalist services. The symbiotic relationship is replaced by a sudden imbalance as sports no longer keeps its end of the bargain. Instead of facilitating access, it increasingly prevents access. This poses a tremendous threat to sports journalists because the authority of beat writing, which sports journalism actually is largely based on close relationships with protagonists. It is particularly the privilege of access that has long served to distinguish professional sports journalism from other actors, such as bloggers, for example. By denying much needed access to sports journalists, sports organizations undermine the legitimacy of established sports media. As a result, sports journalism suddenly finds itself further down the food chain, if you will. However, sports organizations can only afford to deny access to sports journalists if they dispose of other gateways to the public. And this is exactly what the digital sphere provides them with. We have witnessed an enormous rise of owned media channels competing with traditional journalism. And as sports journalism and as sports journalism always enjoyed a rather dubious reputation as the Tory department, as I already mentioned, it has historically not signaled superior legitimacy through a critical stance to its subjects. Hence, in this situation, which is even worsened by general economic and technological constraints, it has become increasingly interchangeable. So journalism has become increasingly interchangeable. Or put differently, its professional legitimacy is increasingly threatened as traditional boundaries between sports journalism and new entrants, such as team media, for example, have become blurred. However, as the reception of material awards, such as accreditations, audience credibility, and particularly the status as an economic muscle, clearly rests on professional legitimacy, sports journalism has to engage in boundary work, defining what is legitimate journalism and what not. And here literature distinguishes three strategies: that is expansion, that is embracing new entrants and new techniques and inviting them into the field; expulsion, that is to get rid of actors and practices that may not correspond to pure journalism or what is perceived as pure journalism; and to protect autonomy by focusing on aspects that may not be occupied by new entrants. And indeed, we have witnessed how sports journalism has employed such strategies and changed in recent years, for example, by embracing new practices such as tweeting and new formats such as live blogs. And it has also tried to protect its autonomy by focusing on different approaches to sports coverage than new entrants, e.g. by innovations or by different reporting styles, no longer only focusing on events, not only sticking to sports, but also by telling different stories differently, by focusing on human interest and by focusing on socio-political issues, for example. However, the concept of boundary work, in my opinion, somehow suggests that sports journalism is indeed and deliberately challenged by other actors. While we, without a doubt, observe shifting power structures, I think it is not so self-evident that other actors indeed actively and deliberately want to get rid of journalism, want to kick it out, that they indeed want to be alone on the pitch. I think there are a lot of reasons to assume that particularly team media, which are perceived as the largest competitor to sports journalism, have a keen interest in a healthy journalism. And the concept of communication ecology exactly sensitizes us for that constellation. It argues that different actors in a particular field or ecosystem, as it is called here, maintain mutual relations on which the survival of the entire system depends. They rely on an ecological balance, if you will. In that sense, new entrants to the communication ecosystem are perceived as rogue actors or parasites, potentially disturbing the health of journalism and thereby the ecological balance. But is this true? Taking the image of the parasite seriously, we know that a parasite depends on the health of its host. And transferred to our case, there are, I think, numerous reasons to believe that sports organizations and audiences value a healthy sports journalism. So this somewhat paradoxical situation of competition and interchangeability on the one hand and mutual dependence on the other begs the question, what role is actually attributed to sports journalism in digital media landscapes? And today, I try to approach this question from three different perspectives, focusing on the different actors in this ecosystem of digital sports communication, namely sports audiences, sports organizations, respectively team media or owned media, and the wider journalistic field. And therefore, I want to briefly present three studies which I have conducted in recent years and months, two of them together with Gregory Perrault from the US, and I will introduce him a little bit later. But the first one is a sole-authored one. However, the paper is not published yet. And in this study, I paid particular attention to audiences, particularly to young audiences. When we talk about boundary work, we often tend to neglect the perspective of audiences, which is kind of strange, I think, because authority rests on acceptance, and acceptance in journalism is provided by audiences. However, the acceptance or usage of legacy news media is extremely fragile in high-choice media environments. Particularly young audiences from Generation Z and Generation Alpha no longer rely on established formats, but create diverse media repertoires, as previous research clearly suggests. Consequently, journalism research has increasingly discovered the audiences and examined what audiences actually expect of journalism content and how they distinguish between journalism and other actors, such as YouTube influencers, for example. But while journalism research in general has already witnessed an audience turn, this does not, at least in my perspective, apply to sports journalism research. We have hardly any knowledge of what audiences actually expect from sports journalism. We know why they watch sports TV or so, and how they enjoy sports TV, but what they really expect from sports journalism, perhaps even as opposed to other actors, is quite unknown so far. Hence, in this study, I posed 2 research questions. I asked, what do sports audiences expect from sport-related information, and to what extent does it distinguish between sports journalism and club or association-owned media, so T-media? To answer these questions, I conducted 38 semi-structured interviews with members of the generations Y and Z who were interested in sports. 15 of them stated that they were very interested, 18 interested, and 5 somewhat interested. Interviews were conducted in summer 21 via Zoom. And I think studies on the audience expectations suffer from one serious problem, and that is that you tend, that by referring to journalism, you tend to prime, in a way, your answers. So to avoid too much reference to folk theories of journalism, we first did not refer to the term journalism or the term T-media. Instead, we asked the respondents how they keep themselves informed about sport. And not surprisingly, we found highly diverse media repertoires. Interestingly, respondents usually did not refer to concrete sources, but rather referred to channels such as Instagram, YouTube, websites, live blogs, of which we know that there coexist journalistic and partisan offerings. So yes, respondents particularly mentioned digital sports media, such as social media and apps, and they clearly highlighted that they preferred short-form formats over long-form content. But when further asking about particular sources, it became evident that for sports fans, sports journalism is indeed no longer a leading player, but still an integral part of the team. Besides that, owned media were mentioned as important elements in sports media repertoires, especially for niche interests, which aren't served by traditional media. One female respondent stated, for example, soccer matches that are really at the lowest level are often broadcast directly on Facebook or something like that, or often in the area of water skiing or wakeboarding, which she was engaged in. There are often live broadcasts on Facebook pages that you can tune into. So going now to more concrete expectations that respondents have of sport-related information. Again, we try to avoid mentioning the term journalism or T-media. So the expectations that respondents have of sport-related information, they give priority to the following 5. They expect sports information to be audiovisual, fast, topic-specific, neutral but still emotional, which is kind of interesting, and analytical. Regarding visuality, which was by far the most often mentioned aspect, one interviewee exemplified 100% I want videos or photos, but especially videos. If I read that, I can still remember exactly which downhill it was. So it was about alpine skiing, and this is a huge issue here in Austria, maybe not in Brazil, I think, but it was in Austria, this interview. So it's about downhill skiing. If I read that, I can still remember exactly which downhill it was. The French skier did a 180 and then skied downhill backwards. If I just read that he did that, then cool, but I want to see it. Sport is something completely visual. Other aspects, and to spoil it a bit, these are aspects which journalism traditionally stands for, such as a critical stance towards sports, the contextualization of events, the offer of behind-the-scenes views, and free content were only ascribed subordinate priority. And you may now wonder, and what about the correctness of information? Interestingly, the accuracy of information did not play a crucial role in the expectation set of the respondents. This is because sport is not perceived as such a serious issue. Said one respondent, I simply believe that in a political context, it can have completely different dimensions if something is wrong, because whether someone wins with a score of so or so, and so, or so, I don't really care. It doesn't have much relevance for me now either. So after having asked for the general expectations of sport information, we now specifically asked for the accomplishments of sports journalism and team media. Regarding sports journalism, we see that it is definitely valued. It is valued as a provider of reliable information who is independent and characterized by good research. It takes into account the breadth of sport and provides analysis. Regarding team media, interviewees also mentioned specific accomplishments, namely information depth instead of breadth, the provision of exclusive information, the proximity to protagonists, the confirmation of one's own position, so e.g. if you're a fan of a team, and the permanent availability of always new and current information. And if you combine these findings with audiences' general expectations of sport-related information, it does not come so much as a surprise that they often tend to perceive team media as superior. Said one female respondent, I'm basically more of a fan of that direct source of information from athletes and maybe even clubs or event organizers sending out the info through the event sites because it's just much more authentic. Interestingly, most understood that this is partisan information. I think there was only this one who makes an exception, who said, so when Liverpool writes about themselves, a report that they won, yes, sure, why wouldn't that be journalism? It's self-centered journalism, but it's still written by a person who may not necessarily be a Liverpool fan or may not necessarily have the big interest in soccer, can be. But most understood that this is partisan information and something completely different from sports journalism. However, in the end, they didn't care, as exemplified by this quote. I don't think an owned medium would debate the controversial issue of whether it's good that FC Bayern is sponsored by Qatar Airways. That's why I don't see it as journalism. It's just an attempt to make the club look good. But that's also legitimate, of course. And I see no problem behind it, but I don't see it as journalism. So obviously, the generation Y and Z expect something different from journalism and owned media. And sports journalism does not have to be afraid of being confused, as respondents were sensitive towards differences. So there was, you could say, low risk of confusion. However, comparing general expectations and perceived services, we can realize that distinctiveness does not guarantee usage. Apparently, sports journalism is perceived as an important player on the market, but rather you could say as a go-to guy in really important games, as someone who is substituted for the final minutes of a decisive game, but rather not someone for the business as usual, for the usual games, for the normal games. So where does this leave sports journalism in terms of boundary work? I would say there is definitely a risk of marginalizations if it chooses the strategy of expansion, and hence risks to get confused. We could conclude that instead it should protect its autonomy by returning to own strength and thereby considering the need for specific, that is personalized information and the audience's priority for short video clips. So it could still be the go-to guy who is important for the serious issues, but still have some relevance in the business as usual reporting of sports through this personalization and these video clips. So let's now switch the perspective and have a closer look at owned media, which can be considered the most threatening insurgents to the field of sports journalism or on the field of sports communication. I have already referred to the shifted power structures, which are ultimately characterized by sports organizations denying access to sports journalists, bypassing sports journalism, and directly addressing audiences. And in the first study, we have seen that the audiences indeed value this direct approach to them. This has led scholars to argue that team media and sports journalism maintain a competitive relationship. And this assumption was supported by different studies, especially by Michael Miller, who conducted interviews with team media reporters. This competition is marked by an orientation of team media towards sports journalism in presentation styles, as well as professional role conceptions. They mimic sports journalism, if you will. However, I have argued before that this may only be half the truth. Taking the metaphor of the parasite seriously, you could argue that the declining health of sports journalism may have negative consequences for team media as well. That is because they implicitly and explicitly rely on the superior credibility of journalism, which is evidenced by the first study. And it is plausible that traditional sports media have a larger and a more general reach than fan-orientated team media. So this led Greg, with whom I conducted this study, Gregory Perot from Appalachian University in the US, and me to ask, how do team media reporters view their relationship with journalists, and how do team media reporters view themselves existing within a sports communication ecology? To answer these research questions, we again opted for a qualitative approach. We conducted semi-structured interviews with 28 team media reporters from Austria and the US, 9 from Austria, 19 from the US. In our sample, we had 21 high-profile teams. So what are high-profile teams? We would say in Austria, these are first division soccer clubs. And in the US, these are NBA, NHL, and NFL teams. And we also had 7 smaller teams in college or niche sports to compare these niche sports with lower visibility in traditional media to the ones with high visibility in traditional media. Respondents were ranged from 21 to 60. 5 of them were female, confirming that this field is obviously very male-dominated, which doesn't come as a surprise to us who conduct or who have conducted a lot of research in the area in the field of sports communication. These interviews were conducted just in the summer, and we analyzed them thematically. And here is what we found. Interestingly, and this really surprised us, and in opposition what Mira has found, who also conducted a study in the US, team media reporters that we interviewed did not perceive the relation to be competitive. This is evidenced, for example, by these 2 quotes. A reporter at an NFL team said, "I think so team media and journalism, totally can coexist. I think it is not a competitive nature." And a reporter at an Austrian football club, so someone who is employed by the football club, said, "It's no competition at all. For me, it's a complementary existence, 100%. Others spoke of synergies or of symbiotic relationships as well. In fact, our interviewers identified clear demarcation lines between sports journalism and team media that made them argue that there was not even a common ground on which both could compete, because they exist in completely different fields. So they said there is no way that we could compete because we are working on 2 different issues. However, and this is what I want to stress already here, is that this is really partly based on an ignorant perspective to the current state of sports journalism. And I always say it is also based on a rather nonchalant perspective on sports contribution to sport journalism's decline. This decline is still recognized by our interviewers, but they don't see any responsibility for this decline. So they appear to be blind for this. But first thing first, how did they draw the boundaries between team media and sports journalism? They were surprisingly self-reflexive and referred to a different skill set, attributing superior writing skills to sports journalists. Like the audience members from study 1, they also acknowledged the difference between depth versus breadth. Said one reporter at an NHL team, "Just being able to focus exclusively on one team really helps, as we can really dive in deep and give people stories that the other guys might not have time for, and the other guys are the journalists here." Third, they referred to different degrees of access, which they took for granted and did not discuss, which is really interesting because we had just argued today, or I tried to argue and make the point that journalism used to have access, and that the problem for journalism is that sports organizations increasingly deny this access. And our interviewees were aware of these differences in terms of access, but they didn't ascribe themselves any responsibility for this, but took it for granted. So they referred to the advantage that we are much closer to the players. A media outlet can hardly keep up with that because they don't have access. We can go over to the locker room at any time and make a short video on Instagram or take a photo on the training session. Journalists don't have that option because they are not there. As I said, they don't discuss that journalists might perhaps want to be there and used to be there, and are no longer allowed to be there. Fourth, also as opposed to Michael Miller somewhat, they acknowledge to pursue partisan goals instead of journalistic norms, which again is somewhat ignorant of the actual state of sports journalism, which is often accused of cheerleading. So they make it themselves quite easy and say, I'm the partisan guy and journalism is the objective guy, but that isn't the reality, as we all know. Said a reporter at an NBA team, I do need to make sure that I push narratives or storylines that it puts us in a positive light. Michael Miller found that the team media reporters somehow relate to the traditional ethics of journalism, and that way claim to be part of the journalistic field. In our study, respondents clearly saw these demarcation lines and draw the boundaries between journalism and team media through referring to different goals, the one of themselves, the partisan goal, and the one of the journalists, the objective one. Team media reporters also referred to different audiences and clearly self-identified as PR staff. Overall, they see, as I already said, no occasion for competition. However, the reasons for this assessment seem to represent some kind of nonchalance about the potential rivalry. Yeah, they just say it doesn't exist without going into detail there. Interestingly, they did not refer, as I perhaps put it quite wrongly before, that they are engaged into completely different fields. They acknowledged the mutual relationships. However, they insisted that this relation is symbiotic and that team media ultimately serve sports journalism. So when they got in contact, when they have this relationship, they serve each other and do not compete. This is perceived as necessary because while they didn't acknowledge their own contribution to sports journalism's decline, they were aware of shifted power structures with team media's role strengthened and the one of sports journalism weakened. This is indicated, for example, by this quote. You can see that more and more cuts are being made in sports journalism. You won't find a journalist who goes with you to Turkey for a week on a training camp, for example. So they explain the decline in sports journalism not by their own contributions, but by external contributions such as economic and technological constraints. However, as I already said, and here indicated very, very precisely, they wash their hands clean of it. The trend is for clubs to produce more and more content themselves, but that's not the fault of the clubs. It's more the consequence of the fact that the media no longer have the resources. Strikingly, our interviewers at the teams didn't express any satisfaction with the situation, as maybe previous research would suggest. One could well argue that it's an advantage for team media if independent sports journalism is kicked out of the field. But yeah, instead of being happy about this or satisfied with the situation, our interviewers expressed deep concerns about the decline. And here, interviewers particularly referred to the differences in audience reach. They were well aware that their own channels are largely restricted to an already loyal fan base. However, to extend audiences beyond that, and this is what teams ultimately want, they want to enlarge their fan base, they are dependent on a powerful journalism, as, for example, indicated by this quote. It's all well and good reporting on our own channels, but to really reach the masses, we need the big media. Moreover, they refer to journalism's credibility advantage, from which they want to benefit by spreading partisan information via traditional news media. It is more credible when something is in the newspaper than we write this. When a journalist does that, the audience expects that it has gone through a filter, that it is not as biased as in our own media channels. So here you again see this reference in a way to the parasite, to the team media, where as a parasite who wants to benefit from the health and the credibility advantage of traditional sports journalism. But let's not forget, one thing is that they do not only that they are not only concerned about sports journalism's decline for strategic reasons, but also for normative reasons. I think nearly all of our interviewees referred to the democratic function of journalism, not only of sports journalism, but of journalism as a whole, for democratic societies, and they were really afraid of a society without a healthy journalism. So this is something which they also repeatedly refer to, and which they also wash their hands clean of, I would say. To conclude this study indicated clearly that sports organizations are still reliant on a healthy sports journalism, and therefore they do not actively strive to kick it out of the game. Still, while they are concerned about the decline of sports journalism, they do not ascribe themselves any responsibility for such decline. Obviously, they are indeed interested in the ecological balance, and this ecological balance is based on a symbiotic relationship between sports media, or between traditional sports journalism and team media. So let's now come to the final study I want to present here. And Matthew, I can already say that I'm a little bit quicker than estimated. I hope this is still okay for you, and we can maybe discuss a little bit longer later or so. But I think this is quite intense. So my apologies for this intense journey on this shifting terrain. Let's finally focus on journalism itself. However, this is not sports journalism as wrongly indicated in this image, but rather on the wider journalistic field. We already know from previous research that sports journalism enjoys a rather dubious reputation in this wider journalistic field. On the one hand, as a toy department that doesn't deal with the really important stuff. On the other hand, however, as an economic muscle of newsrooms, because the audience just loves toys. But what happens when you take away the toy department's toys and lock them up? And that's exactly what happened in the pandemic. And this pandemic situation is what this study refers to. Sports came to a standstill. There were no press conferences. Access to athletes and teams became increasingly restricted, even more restricted than ever before. And in short, the pandemic turned all established routines of sports journalism upside down. It was clear that in this situation, there was no possibility of business as usual, and that sports journalism had to do something differently in order to secure its professional identity. But Greg and I argue in this piece, which was just published in Journalism Studies, that the pandemic only was the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will. For it was not the pandemic that made such reinvention necessary, as I have argued before. Research on team media and other formats in digital media landscapes has long suggested that sports journalism seems to have become interchangeable and thus potentially redundant, meaning it has to do something about it to re-establish its authority. However, it's hard to reinvent practices in day-to-day business, and when you always focus on the next event and on the next player, and always have to fill up all the airtime and the pages that are devoted for sports. So the pandemic may somehow also be, as bad as it was or is, may also be considered the hoped-for disruption that provided the opportunity for change. And indeed, early evidence suggests that the transformation has occurred in times of the pandemic, and serious reporting in sports journalism was pushed to the forefront. We were interested in this study, however, in the question of the extent to which these claims for change are also expressed by the wider journalistic field. Has sports journalism's dubious reputation changed? How is it perceived, valued, and redefined through wider journalism in times of disruption? And the unprecedented crisis posed by the pandemic is the ideal time in which such definition making would naturally occur. We argue that meta-journalistic discourse is the ideal place where such definition making would occur. Fundamentally, meta-journalistic discourse is journalism talking about journalism. This seems particularly urgent when legitimacy and authority are challenged, as is the case in sports journalism anyway, but it seems all the more essential in times of crisis, when sports journalism basically reaches its capacity limits. So meta-journalistic discourse is thus the place where the field as a whole negotiates what is accepted as journalism and what is not, and under what conditions. And it is thus also the central place to ask, in view of the many challenges and the already dubious reputation of sports journalism, to what extent sports journalism is assigned a place in the field. Hence, we posed the following two research questions. How do journalists discursively construct sports journalism? And how do journalists discursively construct the constraints and opportunities of sports journalism? The two are very, very similar, admitted. However, they differ in that we first look inside out. To what extent does sports journalism matter to journalism and society? And the second perspective is an outside in. To what extent do outside influences change what sports journalism is supposed to accomplish? To do this, we analyzed meta-journalistic discourse on the topic of sports. We used the trade press as a central place for meta-journalistic discourse and searched for the term sport in a database listing 21 US-based media outlets over the first year and half of the pandemic. Outlets included, maybe you're familiar with some of them, Columbia Journalism Review, Nieman Lab, Media Post, etc. We ultimately found 166 articles that at least also addressed the meta-journalistic perspective in sports. And in this sample, we identified 13 that illuminated, you could say, distinct facets of the topic, which we analyzed and interpreted qualitatively, and which we then tested again against the material as a whole. So what were our findings? And I think they're quite surprising again, or in a way contradict what we expected from the traditional perspective on this as the toy department. Answering research question 1, we found that sports journalism has become increasingly valued within the field in times of the pandemic. The meta-journalistic discourse primarily addressed the social role of sports and athletes. On the one hand, it was seen as the task of sports journalism to report on the enormous social commitment of sports actors and thus to spread positive role models. That way, sports journalism was perceived capable of contributing to community building, to acting as a social glue in times of crisis. But even the toys, which were often dismissed before, even the toys, the games, the events themselves were not portrayed as inferior as opposed to the serious stuff other journalists deal with. Rather, they were considered as important means of distraction in difficult times. By reporting on sports, sports journalism provides relaxation and hence performs a socially desirable function. Moreover, the meta-journalistic discourse placed great importance on sports journalism as an economic engine of newsrooms, if you will. Some articles focused very much on market-related discussions around sports and explained especially the decreasing media revenues as a whole during the pandemic with the loss of games and subsequently subscribers. It is therefore clear how important sports journalism is as an economic driver for journalism as a whole. So let's quote Friedman. NBC's cable networks experienced a rare decline in distribution revenue, down 3.8% to 1.6 billion, largely due to the loss of games and subscribers for its regional sports networks in the period as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. While these results indicate a protective attitude to the wider field towards sports journalism, findings also reveal calls for change in sports journalism. The pandemic, for example, demonstrates like through a magnifying glass how intensely sports interacts with other social fields such as economics, politics, and science. What is more, the pandemic extremely affected everyday sporting activities and leisure sports. It was for a long time, it wasn't even possible to exercise any sports here in Austria. I don't know how it was in Brazil because of social distancing measures or so. In this context, journalism is called upon to attach more importance to this social dimension of sport. Part of the social dimension is also to focus more on socially critical aspects, such as social inequality, for example. And as indicated, there is initial evidence suggesting that sports journalism has indeed started to focus more on serious reporting during the pandemic, which can be perceived as an evidence for employing the strategy of protection of autonomy in terms of boundary work. Another external influence that is addressed in the meta-journalistic discourse is sport journalism handling of technological innovations. Here, sports journalism is seen as a bit of a testing ground, experimenting with new possibilities. So again, the whole journalistic field appears to be protective of the status quo, of the status of a toy department, as it allows sports journalism to experiment without having to fear any severe consequences. So the positive facet of the toy label is stressed in the meta-journalistic discourse during the pandemic, whereas toys have been perceived as something negative before the pandemic, and maybe after that again, it now is something which is very much valued within the field. To conclude this third study, and this is nearly my last slide for today, the meta-journalistic discourse showed that the wider field does not take the opportunity to expel or completely redefine the toy department. Interestingly, that tends to be a reappraisal of what sports journalism does anyway. The toys are perceived as increasingly important based on the experience of crisis. What seems to occur is a revaluation of sports journalism. This may also have to do with the unmistakable realization of how important sports journalism is as the economic muscle of newsrooms, especially in times of economic crisis, which also affects newsrooms, of course. The meta-journalistic discourse is thus surprisingly, at least to us, protective. However, it is also clear that sports journalism is being called upon to engage in boundary work and to reconsider traditional journalistic norms. Specifically, it is a matter of doing justice to the social significance of sport beyond top sporting events. So yes, this was a tough ride through shifting terrain, as Harden and Billings would perhaps put it. I think taking everything together, we clearly see that even those who might no longer need sports journalism or even seem to benefit from its exclusion are rather surprisingly protective of sports journalism. It has an important role as the go-to guy in situations of crisis and fulfills a normative function that even partisan actors benefit from, this credibility advantage. However, studies also found that most interviewers failed to name a concrete contribution to society, but mostly referred to the importance of the, you could say, very existing of journalism as an institution. So it is not so important what journalism actually does or how it helps us concretely, but more it is important to know that he's around, that it is around, you could say. So I think this leaves a lot of space to discuss how sports journalism should position itself, what actually this means to sports journalistic practice. And I can already announce now that I don't have a proper solution what to do with this, but maybe you have some ideas about it. So thanks for your endurance in the last 45 minutes and through these 3 studies and some theoretical ideas, and for joining me on this tough ride through shifting terrain. Thank you so much for your interest today.
Thank you, Daniel. Yes, there is a lot of things to talk about, but later I will ask you for your references and your study, if you can send me I'm very curious about your studies. Very, very interesting. We have some questions. I believe that Leandro asked me for a question. Yes, he's already there.
Just may I just ask a question? Shall I the screen sharing? Shall I end it so that we can see us, or should I leave the presentation open to skip to some of the slides later? I don't know, but I can start sharing the screen later again. So what?
Yes, please, Daniel. Maybe unshare it, and then
okay, unshare
it's
it.
better. Yeah. I believe it's better for us. So I believe Leandro has a question. Leandro, please.
Okay, thank you, teacher. Thanks, Mr. Daniel. It's awesome to every time I watch my teacher talking about sports and journalism. It's very interesting. Actually, in Brazil, I don't know the worldwide, but in Brazil, the podcasts are growing fast, and most of these podcasts are making more audience than the traditional media. It's very interesting here because they invite soccer players and other sporters just to explain and tell the truth without filters and everything. How can you see this? Is it possible that this podcasts can change the media? We know that interviews and beside in the end of the game, or the interviews as the game finished and the soccer players go there and make this. Do you think this podcast will make this format of or this method of interviews change or not? This just part of it, and everything will be okay in the end. Everyone will work together.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is an excellent question. I don't know if I will have a proper answer, but let me start perhaps first that I can definitely relate to the situation in Brazil, because we witness the same in Europe, that the podcast market is growing extensively, and that I think it would be definitely worth to study this in more detail, the sport podcasting. And I would say that in the sport podcasting field, you see the different actors come together, or you see the dynamics between the different actors, because there are in Germany we have a very famous podcast with Toni Kroos. I think you know Toni Kroos, who has one with his brother, which is really excellent. And then we have some very, very emerging media who have more kind of a humoristic perspective or more a social perspective on sports. And all these actors obviously challenge traditional sports media, and traditional sports media now set up so many podcasts. And we are just conducting a study at this World Cup on innovations at this World Cup, and we also have a closer look at podcasts, and we see that the huge legacy media, I think, have sometimes 2 or 3 podcasts with different perspectives on the World Cup. So this is a really emerging topic, and I would love to study this in more detail. Now, what does it mean? I think I'm not so sure if it will really change the way sports is covered, live sports is covered, because I think we as the fans or the audiences, even if we know that the answers are often not very surprising and players always say the same things, we are in a way used to have this, used to these patterns, and want to hear what yesterday was. Of course, I wanted to hear what Thomas Müller and what all these guys have to say after the loss to Japan, even if I knew what they would say. But I don't know if this will so much change because we are interested in these immediate responses as well. But I think podcast is a growing market, and I think it will change sports journalism. So on a structural level a lot, because they will become more important, and I think other formats will perhaps decrease in their value. But I think one problem with this is that it is still, for me at least, and I think we are communication scholars and should perhaps have competence in this case, but still for me it is really hard to distinguish between the good ones and the not so good ones, because this market is so there is so much going on, and I cannot really understand how this really works, and what I should listen to and what not. So this is for me so overwhelming at the moment that I think this still needs some time, so that the field is settled in a way. But this is an excellent point, and I would be curious to see if it changed interview routines after the matches. At the moment, I cannot see this, but we'll see. I'm not a prophet there.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, there is this Luis, I believe Luis Enrique from Spain, head coach from Spain, is doing some streaming right now about the backstage of the Spanish squad. So there is this, there is those other actors, like even it's not more like team media, like you and Fernando Borges, our friend, studies, but it's something else, like they all actors in the game, they're all athletes and managers, they are doing, they all broadcast. So I believe that there's this changing also in the making. I don't know, what do you think about it?
You now mean that the players themselves are, or the teams themselves. Yeah. So I think this is the most immediate access you could have, and I think this is really something which annoys sports journalists, that they are not allowed on the pitch or so, and that obviously audiences prefer these very authentic information.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, something which is very special for sports journalism, and I think all the people we talk to, so the audiences as well as the team media people, and we also conducted interviews with sports journalists in other cases. They also see how the field they engage in is special as compared to politics. So you couldn't, or at least in some countries, maybe in some countries you could, but at least in democratic countries or so, you couldn't imagine that there is something happening for parties or so as well, like in sports. So you could imagine that this happens from the communicator perspective, but not from the recipient perspective, that they take it as seriously, or that they precisely long for this kind of content. But yeah, this is good that you mentioned this, or interesting that you mentioned this, because this direct perspective, or the immediate perspective on these events, so it's becoming always closer to the respective event, and sports journalists are further away. I think always further away, and where does this leave them? This is the question.
Yeah, exactly. Rolando, please.
I like to like sports and media are very dependent. Depends on each other, right? And in Brazil is something very unusual. I don't know, for me at least. I don't know if it happens in other countries, in other sports, but in the 80s we had a sport talking about volleyball, right? And volleyball was like the 5th, 6th sport in Brazil. And then a TV here, Rede Bandeirantes, and a guy, Luciano do Vale, that was a famous narrator, commentator, whatever, in sports. And he elevates volleyball to the 2nd sport in Brazil. Just using like the journalism, sports journalism, and of course they had a very good generation of athletes that time, but they did that with a sport. So they have the power to do that, to transform a sport or a team or whatever. And I think that the journalism, we talk about the team media and things like that, but I think the great difference, the credibility that, like you said before, yeah? And do you think journalism, like with its impact yeah, on the sports world, has to reinvent themselves, or try to stay as the same way as I was before? Because like I said, they have now the podcasts. Sometimes we have like amateurs doing the podcasts, people that doesn't know anything about sports, but they say things that people like, and the web accepts everything, right? And how the sports journalists can try to transform itself to be like they were on the past decades?
Yeah, that's a tough question, and I don't know if I have a proper answer for this. But maybe if I'm allowed, let me start with the first idea that you thought and that you shared, and I really like this example of volleyball. Because it so much shows the symbiotic relationship that sports and sports journalists used to have, and I think sometimes still have. So we have in Germany or in Austria as well some niche sports, and volleyball is a great case for this, and table tennis as well, where the smaller sports definitely longed or tried to do anything to receive any media visibility and media presence, and this media presence in traditional media, because they have not only the credibility advantage, but they have the larger reach. And if they say we do something on our own, we only reach our already fans who know about table tennis and volleyball, but there are so many people around who are interested in sports, but who don't have the chance or the opportunity to see anything of volleyball. So they try to change and to become more attractive for the media. So this is what we call mediatization, or which I have researched in mediatization research maybe. But this sometimes also depends on one, as you said in this Brazilian example, if I understand correctly, on one a person in the sports journalism field or sports media field who is extremely engaged in something and then really pushes this to the forefront. And then we have something what we could call the Matthew effect. So if you have some visibility, then you receive always more visibility, you receive more sponsors, then you can become more attractive, you can employ better players, and so this is very interesting to see. And I think this also tells us something about the still ongoing relevance of sports media and sports journalism, particularly in terms of this reach. And it's not about, I would say, sports journalism in general, but it's about TV coverage. And this is in sports, I think, the most important thing. And I think, now these players have also the ability to circumvent journalism. So they have the potential to receive some audiences. But in the studies that we conducted, they always say that's not enough for us, because there we only have this limited reach. So this is, I just wanted to stress that I have the same impression as you, and that I really like this example and your point. And now you ask the very tough question: where does this leave journalism, this digital media? And I have to admit again that I don't really have the proper answer. So I would think that the problem for sports journalism is, or the risk is, that it becomes marginalized by all these other actors. So if it just wants to do the same and to show the locker room or so, then I don't really know if this really will help sports journalism's legitimacy or authority. But the other thing is, it also becomes marginalized in a way if it only focuses on the dubious corruption affairs in the Qatar World Cup or so, because people are not so much interested in this, but they want to see the sports. So I think it is a very tough situation for sports journalism at the moment, and the reach, the overarching reach, is still something which is I think the main aspect they can build on. And even if you now say, I always hear, oh, such a disappointing World Cup start for German media, only 6 million viewers. Okay, only 6 million viewers. This is really disappointing as compared to 20 million, which we used to have. But 6 million is still 6 million. And please show me an Instagram channel or an Instagram posting with 6 million views and interactions. So this is, but I think, I think we should discuss this and maybe research this and how journalism feels itself in this situation, what to do. This is really, really interesting. And I think it would also be nonchalant, as the word I used today, to say, okay, we have this reach, because you cannot rely on this reach anymore. And even particularly with the Generation Z and Y, who have completely different media usage behaviors, who use second screens. So I would say, be innovative, use your financial power, you have the financial background to be innovative, to yeah, to show or to have personalized content perhaps, but still don't forget about the whole context and so, and not only focus on the game, but show that sports is more than the game.
Yeah. Yeah.
Difficult. Sorry.
That's it's a tough question. Daniel, yeah, in your presentation, you bring us some results of your researchers, and you are talking about the expectations, and I don't know. And the first, let me begin again. First, you asked me about the difference between Europe and Brazil, and if you can think about some of the difference. And seeing your presentation, I was thinking about some of them. I don't believe that there is a lot of difference between journalists in team media. I believe they think about the same. They are doing a kind of public relations, but it's also journalism, and there is this not really a competition between team media journalists and sport journalists. I believe this is something similar. But about the expectations, and I really like how you said that we don't know really what the audience expects from sport journalism. And I believe here in Brazil, we don't know also, but I do know what the sports journalists themselves think or expect from sports journalism. And there is this, I say that because there is a lot of discussion here in Brazil of sports journalism being, is it maybe entertainment, or it should be more like hard news, more like factual and objectivity and hard news. So there's this, there's a lot of discussion about here in Brazil about it. I don't know if there is this discussion in Europe or in Germany, I don't know, or even the US, but we have this kind of idea that sport, or at least between sport journalists, that sport journalists should be serious and should be hard news and should be only the facts and not stories about human interest and storytelling. No, this should be the case. But if you go to the biggest broadcasters like Rede Globo, it's obvious, it's evident that sport is entertainment. Sport is there's a lot of fun, there's a lot of light tone, there's a lot of human interest, there's not a lot, not much about really hard news and information, because like you said, they don't have this, they are not inside anymore. They are not, there's no way to be inside a club organization like they used to. So, but there is this, at least I see when I go to courses and in higher education, like in the graduate program in journalism, like when you go to universities and we talk about sport journalism, we see the other professionals and even the students wanting to do sport journalism to be more like hard news and less like entertainment. I don't know if this is something you see there in Europe, or if you think about it, something about it.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Thank you for sharing these insights from Brazil. So definitely, I think it's kind of an accusation of sports journalism to say you are only cheerleaders. It's always meant as an accusation, but I think it's not so completely wrong. If you watch skiing, alpine skiing, which is the big issue here in Austria, where I'm based at the moment, so at least where my home is. I'm working in Cologne in Germany, but I still live here in Austria. Then it's always about Austria versus the others, and it's completely patriotic and partisan. And so, but interestingly, when interviewing in these studies, people, they always say that they find it kind of strange. Of course, this is kind of emotions. but they think that journalism shouldn't do that, and they don't like that journalists do this. And maybe this will change in the future, this approach, because they think that particularly due to globalization and anti-discrimination, so they think that doesn't fit to have this patriotic perspective on sports. So maybe this is something more socially which will even change sports journalism, because I also find it interesting that it's not the viewers, at least not those that we interviewed, that really said that they prefer this style of presentation. So this is definitely an issue. This is an issue in sports journalism research, because you would say that precisely this objective or more neutral perspective is something that could distinguish them from others. And it's definitely an area of discussion among the audiences, which, as I said, find it kind of strange if you only cheer for your team or your national team. Yeah, so this is very interesting. What I really forgot with regard to the question Rolando asked, and maybe even in my presentation, is what could be a way for journalism, and this would also be interesting to hear what you think about Brazil, is that what they can offer is analysis, and it is analysis not only in terms of socio-political issues, but in terms of the games. So what German media or Austrian media do, I would say, and even the digital-only media do even better, is they analyze games, and they do it very, very expertly and very greatly. And this is something which the audiences really, at least the sports interest audiences, really like, and which team media often don't do because they cannot do it neutrally, or they are at least the audiences feel that they won't do it neutrally, and to explain how the game has shifted, or why Germany, after a 1-0 lead, loses this game or so. To do this very expertly, something which is precisely done in digital-born media, journalistic media here in Germany, with very, very good experts. This is something that legacy media also tend to do. And I think this perhaps would be a ground where you could distinguish yourself from other actors. And this is also something which amateur bloggers sometimes do. So as Rolando said, there were some who don't have any idea about sports, but I think most of them here, at least in Europe, have perfect knowledge about sports. There are so many nerds, you could say, so many nerds who know so much. This is extremely great, but they don't have the equipment to do it in a technically great style. They don't have the journalistic, you could say, writing skills or so. So they would need an organization, a larger organization, which provides them with this. And this is something which again distinguishes journalism from these amateurs, that it just looks like journalism, it looks professional, and this is what the audiences also want. So this could be a way, this analytical perspective, and then expanding in a way the journalistic field by including more experts, or even these amateur bloggers who are such experts in a third league team or a Premier League team or so, because they follow it for 20 years and know everything about it. So this would be a perspective. Thanks.
Yeah. So sorry, Rolando, I was
no, say it. I'm going to talk about other things.
Yeah, I was just read for Daniel the commentary from Marcelo, and he says, even if sports journalism is turning into entertainment to reach more people, this production is still journalism and should be produced by journalists. This would guarantee the legitimacy of the media and journalistic production. So, like I said, it's a kind of hot topic here in Brazil about this. Is it entertainment or is not? Because if you think about sports like the sphere of sports, like a sphere of human experience, it's more akin to entertainment than to hard facts. But yes, I conclude that it should be journalists could be, but like maybe my answer to Marcelo is that journalists also writes about art and also writes about culture and also about even entertainment and pop culture, and there is not something that it's, if you consider it entertainment, it should not be something that journalists should still work on. I believe that this we should note. Yeah, yes.
Perhaps to add, just to add, in the team which I used to be part of here at the Journalism Studies Center in Vienna, we also do a lot of research, at least Volker Hanisch and Sandra Banyak, on lifestyle journalism, and there you have quite a similar case. So travel journalism, beauty journalism, or so, arts journalism. So this is not a hard topic, and it's obviously entertaining to report about this. And they also suffer from this problem that they might get confused with lifestyle bloggers or so. And this is also a very interesting area where they say how they draw the boundaries and try to remain relevant, because
exactly,
this is they don't have the thing of access. So at least in not in so many cases, this is what journalism also obviously benefits from. In the sporting world, that it has to pay so many such huge amounts to get access to events and to have rights to cover the World Cup. So an individual cannot do this, but an individual can easily talk about the dresses of I don't know, some celebrities or so, and about some travel invitations or so. So interesting field, definitely, and how entertaining is journalism allowed to be? Obviously, it is allowed to be entertaining. I like entertaining journalism if it sticks to the facts in a way.
Yeah, exactly. I believe so. Yeah. And I believe this is something we have to discuss because there is this eminence of the emergency of automated journalism, like computer journalism. So. And the sports is always sports and finance, like they are always the first one to get automated, because it's evident there's a lot of stats, there's a lot of red cards and goals, and it's always computable, like you can calculate it. So if you think that journalism is just the bare hard facts, we are bound to oblivion, because sport journalists won't survive automated journalism. So I believe that maybe using a more like human interest journalism, like you said, and think about, of course, with objectivity and still using the methodologies of journalism, we can maybe survive this with a more depth journalism, more better sport journalism, more human interest journalism, maybe something like that. I always thought about it.
Cool, cool approach, definitely. I think this automated thing is a perfect. I haven't talked about this, but this is so such an important topic in sports journalism, and there are also some studies available now at the moment how audiences differ, but we know artificial intelligence becomes even better and better, and they can nowadays they can write sentences and so, and it's not only red card for and goal by or so they write complete sentences. And I've just listened to a presentation a month ago on a doctoral student, I think from Leeds, who analyzed live blogs, so these live blogs at the media. And I think this is really an interesting field, because this is something, and we try to study this at the World Cup now also, because this is something which can be automated, and some media outlets just have this automated style of reporting where it only says 60 minute and goal for blah blah blah, but there were so creative approaches which are definitely journalism, because what do? They gather further information, they include some tweets, they include other social media channels, they do it in a more entertaining way, exactly, because they refer to further instances, they speculate in a way, they also provide data and analyze this data, but not automatically, but make sense of them. So this format of live blogs, which is only one case for among a lot of cases, is so interesting to see how sports journalism tries to remain relevant, or even tries to offer something which goes beyond automatic reporting and goes beyond what you can see in the TV, but where some print media or online only media really dig so deep and provide so many interesting stuff, which is for second screening perfect. If I watch a game, I always have this the second screen with a live blog, which is entertaining and informing, which is great.
Yeah. Rolando, sorry. Audio. We can hear. We can't hear. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. I was clicking on the thing on the. Sorry. No. I was just thinking here. Like sports they depend on the media for its life, you know. You think like the investing in the team media that was a smaller range of wouldn't affect like the how do you say, sorry, my English may kind of rusty, you know, affect they trying to find new sponsors, like, because you know, when they have a book, they go to try to find new sponsors, they bring a book with where they appear, how many times they appear on the newspaper, how many times they appear on TV, and things like that. You know, if they just rely on team media and don't give the proper importance to journalism, don't you think it's like they are going against their will,
yeah, I understand. I think you mean I would definitely agree, because it's again about reach, yeah, and it's about reach which you can have through traditional media, and maybe this is definitely an important number for potential sponsors. So we always say that that mediatization is not only due to sports itself, but sports want to appear in the media to attract sponsors, to offer visibility to sponsors, and so mediatization is only part of a commercialization, you could say. And so this is, I think, really important. And if you only stick to your own media, then you have a quite limited reach, and this might not be so attractive for some of the sponsors. But again, we know that even sponsoring has become more and more individualized, or advertising has become more and more individualized. And for some teams or some players, this offers perhaps the best opportunity to have a very concrete fan base, because some sponsors only want to engage with this fan base because they know this is a fan base who, I don't know, does this and that. So and it doesn't have any added value to appear in the general media, perhaps. But this is again with team media, I think, a great point, because I agree with you. Appearing in the media makes definitely sense, because you want to have reach to provide to your sponsors.
Yeah. I was thinking about also this, but then about your papers, Daniel, and maybe Rolando can give us some light about it, because as a former athlete and a former NBA player, maybe Rolando can answer me these two. I was thinking about, what do the athletes think about sports journalism? I believe this is a big question, because I remember listening to an athlete, I don't remember who, some time ago, and he was trashing the sports media in Brazil, because the things that journalists says about the game, it's not real. Like, there's a lot of complicated words and complicated ideas and frameworks of tactical models and I don't know, functions in the field, And this player was saying that none of this is real. This is a discourse about the game, but this is not how the game is played. This is not how we understand the game. And I believe when Rolando says about there's a lot of podcasters that don't know a thing about the game, he's thinking as a former athlete, because there's a lot of this discussion about the game, and if you listen to the podcast, it seems like they know a lot, but if you go to the field, maybe this is not real. I don't know. And so I'm kind of curious about what do athletes think about sport journalism?
Yeah, this is what I'm also curious about. So Rolando could perhaps say, I could say how we try to assess this, but maybe, yeah.
Okay, about the podcasters.
Yeah.
They think they know a lot. Knowing a lot is one thing. Think they know a lot is another thing. Sometimes, there's a difference. The problem is with sports journalism, sometimes that they're journalists that want to be to grow on somebody else's decadence. Like we have a guy here on the radio in Curitiba that every time say, no, he's the next player. No, that's one player. No, it talks about it. It happened to me my last year that I played. He had a guy on TV in Santos on the newspaper that was against me. Doesn't matter what I did, and that thing hurts, because it's your profession, and sometimes the guy doesn't like you, and I think that the player I think can benefit from the journalism, but it has to know how to handle. Sometimes one wrong word that you say to the journalist, and it's the end for you, because the guy is going to trash you all the time. No, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. So I think you have to think before you say, things, because nowadays, like the society is, one wrong word and you finish, so it's very hard, to the player. And lots of players, especially soccer here in Brazil, they don't have the education, don't have the culture to give the right answers, and then it's a big thing that grows from that, and then so it has to be not because only the journalism, the journalist, because I think if he's a serious journalist, he will know what to put on the paper that won't be hazardous to the player, but the things that go on the paper, on TV, that it's very difficult situation, but I think we can benefit from each other, and there's journalists and there's journalists, the journalists that are there for the real thing and things like that want to benefit from your decadence or your bad day one day, and so they live for that.
Yeah,
I think this is a great question. Thank you for asking this. And I had to laugh because I always also think that sometimes as a journalist, perhaps you think, okay, things are more complicated than they actually are. So this is, I think, my experience from the pandemic, when there were no no people in the arenas, and you could hear everything. And when the coach of a Bundesliga team screams something on the pitch, it's exactly what I would do when I play after work. So this is obviously sometimes the game isn't that complicated. So maybe the players have sometimes, I think, simple answers. And this is what I always find curious in a way, that it appears to be that simple. And I think it would definitely be worthwhile to study, or necessary perhaps to study what the protagonists of sport really expect of journalism, or how they perceive journalism, and what perspective they have on journalism. A study by, I think, Ondřej Trunecka in the Czech Republic did it a few years ago. This was published because he had access to quite great athletes. And this is always the problem, I think, for us as researchers, or at least for me here as a researcher, that these very, very famous sports protagonists aren't available for research. And so you have to find alternative gateways perhaps to assess them. And we did the study on autobiographies and analyzed autobiographies of athletes, and try to identify how do they talk about sports media and their experiences with sports media there. So this definitely has limitations, but this is perhaps one way to assess how players think about media. And then you always have these on-site interviews sometimes. There was, after the Champions League final last year with Real Madrid, there was, at least in Germany, one very, very popular interview with Toni Kroos again, who dismissed in a way the journalist, because he asked, his first question was critical. So if Real may have underestimated the opponent, and Kroos didn't answer anything, he said, go home, because we want to celebrate, and it's not legitimate now to ask a critical question. So this is also some how these logics collide there, and this was interesting. And again, let me think about how can we approach what players think about sports journalism, and how their relation perhaps is shaped to sports journalism as compared to team media reporters, because the team media reporters we asked said they have, of course, a privileged access to the players, because they work together and they are sometimes even buddies.
Yeah, great. There is another commentary from Giovanna. She says there is a lot of criticism on social network that the World Cup should be taken seriously and not and is not a fashion show, and that the media really wants to make you swallow what they want. So, like I said, this is a very hot topic here in Brazil, and how Rede Globo how Rede Globo's do its coverage. And there is a lot of players doing coverage here in Brazil. Actually, there is a famous streamer, a famous YouTuber called Casimiro. He is doing reacts of every game, and he is broadcast one live game each day, something like that. So there is kind of different ways of portraying the World Cup right now. But there is this lot of criticism of Rede Globo. Sorry, Daniel.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool to see how much how different all the different approaches. Cool. Interesting. Yeah. Should follow the Brazil coverage more, but I don't know if I could even from here.
Leandro, please.
Okay. Actually, watching for these games from the World Cup and behind, we can see the traditional media in the TV. The Rede Globo is the largest one. It's the big player from Brazil that's always covering everything. But this is a very interesting point because I believe that in the case of podcasters that are presenting every day, especially for Casimiro and Jovem Pan too, invited another journalists to be there. Most of these guys are not journalists, they're not professional journalists or studies for that. But it's interesting because when we were talking for the traditional media, most of these journalists are talking about what happened during the game and what happened and everything with the soccer players and all. And these podcasters and these streamers are visiting places, are talking to soccer players outside the camp. It's interesting because we know that sometimes in the end of the game, the interviews are like are not combined, that the players cannot speak everything freely, and in the end, when they are talking about with someone that is it's a podcaster or it's a streaming or it's the normal one, they usually say things that are out of the lines. I believe that's why the podcasts and the streamers are making so many people watching them and invite and enjoy their kind of news. I believe that. Do you believe that this kind of freely conversation and this kind of a different point of view coverage will change this traditional media soon, or they will cross a shadow of a valley of shadows to get there one day?
Well, that's again such a tough question, but it's such a great question. It's such a great observation. I think a colleague from Spain, José Luis Rojas Torrijos, also argues that particularly these streamers on Twitch have this direct connection to the athletes, and that this is a completely new form of coverage, which is particularly interesting for young audiences, which is very, very close. And the interesting thing is, I think that traditional sports media were always always experienced that someone told them not to be that close to the sports protagonist, that they have to keep distance. And this is, I think, a very prominent accusation that sports journalists are too close. And now you see that those who are even closer, who don't have any professional distance because they are not professional, are more successful. But I think in terms of boundary work, I would say that there won't be any valley of shadows, or I won't even think that this will be a very quick thing, because I don't think that sports journalists, particularly in terms of their own self-conception, will try to establish such a closeness, or if they do. So I'm really curious if they will do. So what we had in Germany, I don't know if you have the same in Brazil, and I'm always talking only about Europe. Maybe you have witnessed this in Brazil already, but there were so-called fan reporters. So you embraced fans and said, okay, you as a fan, you are now here. And so journalism or media organizations try to have the best from both sides. So the journalist could remain objective and could say, okay, I keep my distance, but here I have this fan, and this fan goes to the sports protagonist and asks him as a fan, and so I can air or broadcast this interview. So I benefit from the closeness, but still keep my distance. So this is maybe a way to go around this. But at least here in Europe, I think we have quite a strong self-conception of not being too close, and rather expulsing everyone who is too close to the protagonist. Even if I really see from people I know from sports journalism that they really get in a way annoyed or say, it could be so easy, but I'm not allowed to. But this would be the better interview, because you're completely right. I think in terms of the audiences, this has more value than these interviews on the pitch after the game is finished. So excellent point. It will be very, very exciting to see how this develops. So maybe you should do some research on this or have a closer look at this, because it's fascinating.
I was thinking about maybe and Casimiro, that's the streamer that Leandro was talking about, and he does a kind of broadcast that is very traditional, but there is other actors in Brazil doing something different, like Thiago Leifert. This is a former sports journalist from Rede Globo. Now I believe he's independent. I don't know actually, but he was doing the broadcast from Copa do Brasil, Brazilian Cup, in Amazon, and basically is the broadcast is he talking with a friend about anything and everything and not about the game, and eventually there is a goal, let's look at this situation here. And I don't like it personally, but I know it was a huge success with a younger generation, a very younger generation actually. And I believe this is another way of doing sports. I don't know if it is journalist, but it's sports content. Maybe there is this distinction we should make. And I also see a new tendency of the more traditional media of doing a more intellectual experience of broadcasts, like La Liga, Spanish La Liga does this kind of thing that it divides the screen into halves, and in one half there is a lot of stats and what is going on with heat maps and something like that, a lot of computational graphics to understand best understand the game, a best understand of the game. And another part of the screen, it's the traditional broadcast. And I believe this, maybe my question for you is, do you see this tendency to maybe doing something of more intellectual way of thinking about sports, journalists doing this as a kind of response to this changing field of sports journalism in the digital era, or is something that maybe we are going this way of a more entertainment way of doing things, and I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think definitely that this is plausible, that that sports journalism perhaps sees what can I do on the screen and what can we do differently, and perhaps have this more intellectual perspective or this more analytical perspective, as I said, what is obviously valued by the audiences. But still, what you said, this coverage of people just watching sports or talking about anything and then saying, okay, there was a goal. It shows how differentiated all this has become, and I love your approach that you say, okay, we should differentiate between sports content and sports journalism. And there are a lot of great scholars like Scott Eldridge or so who argue, okay, maybe we should leave the term journalism completely behind, or at least look at the audiences, what they perceive as journalism or what has a journalistic function. So maybe we should even reconsider this, because it's becoming increasingly hard to determine what exactly is journalism. And when we study sports journalism, who is a sports journalist, and are these sports journalists relevant to the audiences? Do they possess any audience authority? And if we just watch Instagram or second screen, I think most younger people, and maybe me neither, we don't really check the exact source, but we scroll through and see, okay, this is an interesting video. And if it comes from someone who was present at the stadium and has witnessed, I don't know, Djokovic drinking some strange water or so, I don't know. So this is this is also interesting for me, and a great information, or an exciting or relevant information. So this will be a major task, I think, for us in the future, to determine what do we understand as journalism, and maybe for I'm a huge fan of systemizing everything and to try to bring some order into this. And it's already hard to understand what formats are on the market and how can we relate them, how can we locate them in the sports in the field of sports content. And what you just mentioned, these streams where people only are streamed watching soccer and talking about it, or so, these are also some new entrants. And yeah, I have a nephew who is 12 now, and he only watches this kind of sports content. He wouldn't even bother to. He says he's a real football fan. He says he identifies as a football fan, but he would never watch a 90-minute live game. So on TV, because it's too boring for him. He would go to the stadium perhaps, and still he is perfectly informed. through TikTok, and there it doesn't matter if it's a fan, if it's a player, or if it's a journalist who provides the information to him. So this is also in terms of media competence interesting, maybe even disturbing, because sometimes, yeah, it's not that good what information they receive. In sports, again, it's not so serious, but on other issues, the Ukrainian war, so it's much more sensitive. But again, this is interesting and will be, I think, a great area for future research on.
Nice. Mais questões, gente? Pro Daniel, temos ainda uns 10 minutos. Rolando, please.
No, I think we covered all, right? I think I had numerous experiences with journalists, and 99.9% were great. You know, the only time was that my last year, that the guy didn't like me, and I think it's essential, right? That the sports journalism is essential to sports, and the other way around is true too, right? So I think we have to work together and walk together, because one cannot live without the other. It's very important. And, I hope it grows. I think with more channels integrated, but with the different, I think that they have different importances, for different publics. Different. Some will reach one public, and some will reach other public. They have different ways, and they are important on their ways. So I like very much your presentation, and it's always a learning process, right? And I came from the professional part of sports. I played 22 years of basketball. I play in the national team, in the NBA, and Olympics, and World Championships. I play all over the world, and it's very interesting to learn these other faces of sports. That they're all connected. And we always learn. And so, thank you very much for the presentation and for the elucidating me on the topic.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation and for sharing your experience as a professional basketball player, a professional athlete. This is also definitely something which is highly valuable for me and for us as researchers, I would say. So that's great.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Daniel. I don't know if you have any other consideration. We have still 3-4 minutes, but I think it was great. It's an excellent topic, and I believe there's this great discussion, hot discussion here, also in the chat, president discussion about this topic of journalism, sports journalism. But I believe it's great to hear other perspectives and to see actually how close our journalism is also to the perspective from Europe. So it's great. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I can also only agree. Thank you for the invitation again. This was perfect. Great discussion. I think we covered a lot, and I think most of the topics which are really important. So yeah, feel free to get in touch if you want to know more, or not only want to know more, but I don't know if I could provide answers, but maybe if you want to collaborate or anything, then feel free to reach out. Would be great for me. I wish you good luck for tonight or for this afternoon for the World Cup, for your start. That it will be better than the German one. Austria hasn't even qualified, so it's quite easy to live in Austria at the moment because there it doesn't matter. And yeah, good luck for everything, and we'll keep in touch.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Bye-bye.
Take care.